I built my workshop with my own hands over 3 summers. In the morning I finally hung the last piece of my wife's pottery collection on the wall. I thought I was done fighting for things that were already mine. Then my son-in-law called and told me he'd already listed it on Airbnb. He didn't ask. He announced it. It's just sitting there, Gord. He started, then caught himself. I'd told him 100 times I wasn't Gordon. I was just Dad, but he never quite managed it. The whole property's underused. Sylvie and I have been running the numbers. A place like that, Lakefront, 40 minutes from Whistler, you're looking at $4,000–5,000 a month easy during ski season. More in summer if you pitch it right. I didn't say anything right away. I looked out the window of my kitchen in Squamish toward the Douglas firs at the property line and let him keep talking. We'd handle everything. The bookings, the cleaners, the guest messages, all of it. You'd just collect your share, and where would I be while strangers are sleeping in my workshop? The suite above the garage is actually pretty comfortable once you put a proper bed up there. We were thinking you could. I stopped listening somewhere around thinking you could. 34 years as a mechanical engineer with BC Hydro. Every overtime shift during the ice storms. Every weekend I drove out to substations in the Fraser Valley while other men were watching hockey with their kids. Every raise I deferred spending because Elaine and I were saving for something we'd talked about since our second date. A piece of land near water where we could eventually be quiet together. Elaine passed 22 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I bought the property in Pemberton 6 months after her funeral. 11 acres. A small cabin, a detached structure I converted into a woodworking and pottery studio. Her wheel is still in the corner, still centered on the rubber mat she bought at the shop in Garibaldi Highlands. I haven't moved it. I don't intend to. I appreciate you thinking about it, I said, which was not entirely true. But no, Dad. His voice shifted. Softer, which I'd learned to distrust. You're out there alone. What happens if something goes wrong in winter? At least if the property's generating income, it justifies the upkeep costs. I justify the upkeep costs. With my pension. A pause. Then, Sylvie thought you might be resistant. She said to give you time to sit with it. Sylvie, my daughter, who had apparently already discussed this enough with her husband that she knew in advance I'd say no. I told him I'd think about it, which I wouldn't, and got off the phone. I walked out to the studio. Ran my hand along the edge of the workbench I'd built from salvaged fur, and stood there in the smell of sawdust and linseed oil until my chest stopped feeling tight. The warning I should have paid more attention to was that he said, Sylvie and I have been running the numbers. That meant spreadsheets. That meant this wasn't an impulse. My daughter called 2 days later. She opened with pleasantries about her kids, my grandchildren, the school play, a dentist appointment. Then, gently, did you talk to Owen? Owen, my son-in-law. 14 years married to my daughter, 12 years of Sunday dinners, 10 years of me pretending I didn't notice the way he looked at things I owned and quietly calculated their worth. He called me, yes, and? My answer is no, Sylvie. The property isn't a rental. It's where I live. Dad, you're there, maybe 6 months out of the year. 7. And that's my choice. You're spending money maintaining a place that could be paying for itself. I'm not interested in it paying for itself. I worked 40 years so I wouldn't have to think about things paying for themselves. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, there was an edge I recognized from when she was 16 and thought I was being unreasonable about something. Owen's really excited about this idea. He's put a lot of work into the research. It would mean a lot if you'd at least look at what he's put together. He's welcome to do research. My answer won't change. Another pause. You've been different since Mum died. I let that sit there. More closed off, she said. She would have wanted you to be open to things. I'd been a calm man most of my life. Elaine used to say I had the temperament of a well-maintained boiler, steady, reliable, and slow to show pressure, but I knew when I was being managed. Your mother, I said carefully, wanted me to enjoy my retirement. That's what I'm doing, in my workshop, on my land. We ended the call without resolution. I sat at the kitchen table afterward and wrote down the date and the gist of both conversations. Old habit. In engineering, You document things not because you expect trouble, but because precision prevents misunderstandings, and because sometimes what people say and what people later claim they said are two different things. September passed. The birch trees on the north end of the property turned yellow, then bare. I settled into the rhythm I'd been building since I moved out there full-time. Up before light, coffee on the deck, an hour in the studio before the day properly began. Afternoons splitting wood or fixing whatever needed fixing. Evenings reading or listening to the CBC. On clear nights I could see the stars in a way that still surprised me even after 2 years. I let myself believe the rental idea had been dropped. Then in mid-October, I drove into Pemberton for groceries and stopped at the hardware store for caulking compound. There's a community board near the entrance, the kind with the little paper strips for phone numbers. I noticed a printed card because the photo on it looked familiar. It was my deck, my studio window, my fire pit. Lakefront retreat, Pemberton Valley, sleep 6, hot tub, pottery studio. Minutes from world-class skiing, from 389 Flores night. I stood there in the hardware store holding a tube of caulking and reading a rental listing for my own property. The website was slick. Someone had paid for it. There were a dozen photographs, some taken through my studio window from outside, some clearly taken the last time Sylvie and Owen had visited in August, when I'd given them a proper tour. The booking calendar showed availability highlighted in green, with several dates already blocked in red. October long weekend, booked. First 2 weekends of November, booked. My phone was in my pocket. I thought about calling Sylvie right there in the store and decided against it. I paid for my caulking. I drove home at the speed limit. I made dinner and ate it. Then I opened my laptop. The listing was on a platform called Vacasa and also on Airbnb. The property was described as a working artist's retreat with access to a fully equipped ceramic studio, Elaine's wheel, her kiln, her tools hanging on the pegboard she'd organized herself, right down to the little wire loop trimmer she'd had since her first class at the community center in North Vancouver in 1987. Listed as an amenity for paying guests. I called a lawyer the next morning, a woman named Judith Okafor, recommended by a neighbor who'd used her for a boundary dispute. Her office was in Whistler, but she took calls remotely. I walked her through everything, the calls, the dates, the listing, the booking calendar. This is unauthorized commercial use of your property, she said. Potentially fraud depending on what they've collected and from whom. Have they taken any money? The calendar shows confirmed bookings. I don't know the payment details. Do you have any written agreement with your son-in-law or daughter granting them any right to rent, manage, or represent your property in any capacity? No. Then we move quickly. I'll draft a cease and desist that goes out today. You'll also want to contact the platforms directly, Airbnb and Vacasa, and report the listing as unauthorized. They have processes for this. Document everything before you do anything else. I spent $650 on a security system that afternoon. 3 cameras, one covering the driveway, one the studio entrance, one the back of the cabin. Motion activated, cloud storage. The installer drove up from Squamish and had them running by 6 o'clock. Judith's letter went out the next morning by registered mail and email. It was thorough. Immediate removal of all listings. Disclosure of all bookings taken and funds received. No further contact with guests, platforms, or property management services regarding my land. Acknowledgement of my sole ownership and exclusive right to use and occupy the property. Failure to comply within 72 hours would result in civil action and a report to the RCMP. Owen called at 9 that evening. You sent a lawyer's letter to my house. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard before. Controlled anger, but under it something uncertain. You listed my property for rent without my knowledge or permission. We were moving forward with the business plan. I figured once you saw the bookings, once you saw actual money coming in, you'd come around. It's not like I was hurting anything. You've booked strangers into my home, into my wife's studio. It's a pottery wheel gourd. Guests think it's charming. I kept my voice level. Take the listings down, refund everyone, remove every photograph. If I check tomorrow and the listings are still active, I'm filing a report. You're going to call the cops on your daughter's husband over a business misunderstanding, over fraud. Take the listings down. He hung up. I checked both platforms before bed. The listings were still active. I called Judith's answering service and left a message. He hadn't complied. Please proceed with everything. The next night, my camera caught something. At 11:40, a truck turned into my driveway. Owen's F-150, the one with the kayak rack he never actually used. He got out and walked around the property for several minutes, trying the studio door, which I'd padlocked 2 days earlier. Standing on the deck, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the dark windows. He made a phone call. I watched him on my laptop screen. A small gray figure in night vision green, standing in the driveway of a property he seemed to have already decided was partly his. He left without doing anything. I saved the footage and sent a copy to Judith. 3 days later, a constable from the Pemberton RCMP detachment came to my door. Young, professional, thorough. I showed him the listing, the booking calendar, the cease and desist, the timestamp on Owen's night visit. He asked whether Owen had any claim to the property. A shared mortgage, a family trust, any written agreement. No to all of it. The booking calendar shows 4 reservations, he said. Do you know how much he's collected? The going rate on the listing was $389 to $450 a night. The October long weekend was blocked for 3 nights. 2 November weekends. Minimum several $1,000s, probably more. He made notes. And the guests who've booked, do they know the property owner hasn't authorized this? They have no idea. As far as they know, they're renting a legitimate vacation property. All right, I'm opening a file. If he shows up with guests, call us immediately. Do not engage with him directly. The long weekend came. Friday afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with my phone in front of me and a cup of tea I wasn't drinking. At 2:30, I saw headlights on the road. Owen's truck followed by an SUV with Alberta plates. A couple, maybe early 40s, and 3 children, the youngest still in a car seat being lifted out. They'd driven from Calgary. I called the constable. He said he was 20 minutes out. I watched through the window. Owen brought them up the front steps like he owned the place, which, according to every document I had, he did not. He tried the front door. Locked. He knocked. I didn't answer. Give me 1 second. I heard him say through the glass, his voice carrying the particular cheerfulness of a man who doesn't yet know a problem exists. He knocked harder. Hey, just a small mix-up. The owner's a bit old-fashioned about communication. The husband from Calgary said something I couldn't make out. Owen laughed, too loud. The RCMP vehicle turned into my driveway 6 minutes after I called. He'd been closer than he'd said, which I appreciated. I opened the front door as the constable came up the steps. What happened next took about 15 minutes. I watched most of it through the window. The constable spoke with Owen first, then with the Calgary couple. The wife pulled her youngest child close when she understood what was happening. The husband's voice rose. He doesn't even own it. The constable handed Owen a document. Owen read it and his face changed in a way I hadn't seen before. Not anger this time. Something smaller. The Calgary family drove away. The father was on his phone before the SUV was out of the driveway. I could guess who he was calling. Owen stood in my driveway arguing with the constable for several more minutes. Then he got in his truck and left without looking at the cabin. The constable came to my door. He's been formally advised that he's under investigation. He's been served with a civil injunction. He's not to contact you except through legal representation. He paused, paid $2,400 for the long weekend. He collected it through the platform. They'll be pursuing their own complaint. After he left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. Outside, the mountains to the north had snow on them. A Steller's jay was working over the suet feeder I'd put up in September. Elaine had always loved the Steller's jays. She said they were like crows that had decided to dress better. My phone rang. Sylvie, I answered. Owen just called me. Her voice was strange, flat. He says the police were at the property. Yes, Dad. A long pause. Did you actually call the police on him? I reported a fraud. He listed my property for rent without my permission, collected money from multiple families, and refused to stop after receiving a formal legal notice. Yes, I called the police. He's my husband. I know. You're going to destroy our finances over this, if he gets charged. Sylvie. I kept my voice quiet. I said no. Twice. He ignored a lawyer's letter. He showed up at my property at midnight after I'd told him to stop. He drove a family with 3 children from Calgary to a house he had no right to rent them. I didn't create this situation. She was crying. I'd heard my daughter cry since she was an infant, and I'd never once been able to stand it. He just wanted to help, she said. He thought if you saw it working, it's not his property to make work. Silence. Then Mum would be so upset right now. You know that. She would hate this. The words landed the way she'd intended them to. Elaine had been the one who kept the peace at every family gathering, who found the language to smooth things over, who could make 2 people who were furious at each other feel, by the end of an evening, like they'd reached something on their own. Your mother, I said, understood that kindness and being a pushover are not the same thing. She knew the difference better than anyone. Sylvie didn't respond to that. We ended the call without resolution. I ate dinner and did the dishes and went to bed. I lay awake for an hour thinking about Elaine, about whether she'd be disappointed in me. I didn't think so. I thought she'd have said the same thing I said, only more diplomatically, and she'd have said it 2 months earlier. She always knew sooner than I did when something had gone wrong. November moved slowly. The studio was quiet. I got a great deal of woodworking done, a set of shelves for the cabin, a small cabinet I'd been planning since spring. In the mornings, I drove the back roads in my truck just to see the country. The constable called twice with updates. Owen had retained a lawyer. The platforms had suspended the listing after I reported the unauthorized use. 2 other families who'd booked and been turned away were pursuing claims through small claims court. Judith called in early December. The RCMP has referred the file to Crown Counsel. Given the amounts involved and the fact that he continued operating after the cease and desist, they're likely looking at fraud under 1,000 for each transaction. Potentially fraud over 5,000 if they add up the total collected. It's also possible they'll proceed summarily rather than by indictment, which means faster resolution. He'll almost certainly be offered a conditional discharge or a suspended sentence with restitution if he has no prior record. What does that mean practically? He avoids a conviction on his record if he completes the conditions, but restitution to you, to the platforms, to the families. Probably $12,000 to $15,000 total by the time it's sorted, and he'll have a criminal file regardless of the outcome, which will complicate any future real estate licensing or business registration. Owen didn't contact me directly again. The listings were down. The studio sat quiet through December, which was how I preferred it. The week between Christmas and New Year's I spent alone on the property, which was my choice and felt correct. I made a turkey for myself, watched the snow come and go, fed the jays. I called Sylvie on Christmas morning. The conversation was polite and brief, the way conversations are when 2 people are waiting to see what shape things will take. She called again in late January. Owen took the deal, she said. Financial discharge. 2 years. He has to pay back everyone, do 40 hours of community service, and he can't be a party to any real estate transaction for the duration. I heard. Things are difficult. Her voice was careful, financially and otherwise. He's had to step back from a project he was working on. It's been hard on the kids. I didn't say anything. I'm not asking you to apologize, she said. I know you won't. I don't know what I'm asking, actually. You can say what you want to say. A long pause. I keep thinking about how Mum would handle this. She'd have found a way to make it okay by now. She would have found a way to talk to both of us separately until we each felt heard, I said. That was her gift. I don't have it. Sylvie made a sound that was almost a laugh. I'm still your father, I said. That hasn't changed. And I still want to see my grandchildren. Whatever needs to happen between you and Owen, I'm not part of that. Can I bring them up in the spring? Without Owen, I'd like that very much. Call ahead. I like my quiet. I know you do. And this time she did actually laugh, small and tired. I've known that my whole life. We talked for a few more minutes. Nothing resolved, but the air had changed slightly, the way it does in February when you can't quite feel warmth yet. But something in the light tells you the angle has shifted. February was long and cold. I finished the cabinet, started a small bench for the deck. I learned a new dovetail joint from a YouTube channel run by a retired furniture maker in New Brunswick who explained things the way a patient person explains things, slowly, with humility about the parts he himself found difficult. On the second Saturday in March, I was in the studio when I heard a car on the road. My cameras showed an unfamiliar sedan, and then the person getting out was Sylvie. Alone. She'd called the night before to say she was coming. She looked tired. She looked like someone who'd been making hard decisions for several months, and hadn't finished making them. She also looked like her mother in a way that I found, as always, impossible to fully absorb. She came into the cabin and I made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table, which is the table we've always sat at. The same table that was in the house in North Vancouver when she was a teenager rolling her eyes at my driving. She looked around the cabin. At Elaine's photograph on the shelf by the window. At the new shelves I'd built along the east wall. At the view through the glass of the frozen pond and the tree line. "It's beautiful here," she said. "I always knew it was, but sit with it for a while and it gets more so though." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "I owe you an apology. I knew he was working on it. The listing. I didn't tell him to stop when I should have. I waited. I thought you'd come around once you saw money coming in. I don't know what I thought. That you were being stubborn out of grief and that this would show you the property could take care of itself." She looked at the table. "That was wrong." "Yes," I said. "It was. I'm sorry, Dad." The word sat there between us, genuine and insufficient the way apologies often are when the damage is real. I didn't tell her it was fine because it wasn't entirely fine yet. But I also knew that wasn't the point. "I know," I said. We sat there for a while. Outside, a Clark's nutcracker landed on the birch tree at the corner of the studio, its black and white pattern sharp against the white snow. Elaine would have had her binoculars out in approximately 4 seconds. "Your mother would have handled this by now," Sylvie said. "Not for the first time. She would have handled it differently. Not necessarily better." I paused. "She also would have said that someone who goes around your boundaries on the grounds that they know better than you isn't trying to help you. They're trying to manage you." Sylvie didn't argue with that. We ate lunch. I showed her the cabinet I'd built, the new shelving, the dovetail joint I'd been practicing. I showed her the Stellar's Jay who came every morning to the suet feeder and who had, I was now fairly confident, a specific call he used when he wanted more suet and a different one when he was just announcing himself. "You've become a bird person," she said. "Your mother always said I would eventually." That was when Sylvie started crying, which I'd known was coming since she arrived. I put the kettle on for more tea and let her. After a while, she asked if she could come back in the spring with the kids, and I said yes, same as I'd said in January. I asked her to call ahead because I liked my quiet, same as I'd said then. She said she would. She drove out in the late afternoon, the sedan disappearing around the curve where the birch trees close in on both sides. I stood on the deck until the sound of the engine faded. The sky to the west was turning the particular pale orange it turns in March, when you can believe again, provisionally, that the cold won't last forever. I went back inside. The studio was warm from the wood stove. Elaine's wheel stood in its corner on the rubber mat she'd chosen, patient and still. I sat in the chair by the window, the one positioned to catch the evening light, and didn't read. Just sat there watching the last of the color drain out of the sky. The property was mine, paid for across 34 years of early mornings and late calls, and every small sacrifice that doesn't feel small while you're making it. I'd protected it. The cost had been real. A difficult season with my daughter, a legal process that aged me in small ways, months of my retirement spent doing things I hadn't planned on doing. But the workshop was quiet. The wheel was where Elaine had left it. The Jays would be back at the feeder in the morning. Some things take time to get right. Some doors you have to close before anyone is ready. And sometimes the truest act of love is refusing to let the people you love convince you that your life is theirs to reorganize. I put another piece of wood on the fire and listened to the property settle around me in the cold.